This episode was made possible through the generosity of our supporters on Patreon. If you'd like to see videos and hear podcasts before everyone else, become a supporter of Liz Law App on Patreon to support our work here at Byther Farm.
This is rather nice, sitting around having breakfast and having a chat. That's much better than sitting in a proper studio or being standing out on the street or something.
And it's more delicious too.
It is. So I'm joined this morning for breakfast by Morag Gamble. And if you're not familiar with Morag, would you like to introduce yourself and let everybody know what it is that you do?
Oh, thanks, Liz. It's really nice to be here. This is the most delicious bowl of berries straight out from your garden. I'm from Australia. I'm from a permaculture village just on the east coast of Australia, halfway up, and I run something called the Permaculture Education Institute. And basically, I teach permaculture teachers, but I also, like you, do a YouTube sharing what's going on in the garden and a podcast of what's going on with our thinking and ideas and who's writing books, what great books are out, and also work a lot with youth, and particularly in refugee settlements in East Africa. So just connecting up this global learning community to find how we can live better, live simpler.
I think you're kind of underselling some of what you do, but that's a fairly common trait for lots of people I speak with. So Morag is inspirational in what she does. I think you inspire lots and lots of people right across the globe, and she's also like a really good egg.
Thank you, Liz.
You've been staying with us for a couple of days, and Mr. J said to me, it's just like having a member of the family here, isn't it?
That's so nice.
It feels so comfortable to have you here. So you obviously give off these like really chilled out, really positive vibes. So that's
that's
really
great. Thank you.
That's really so I've also got berries. So you are going to hear us eating, but I think that's quite a nice way to have a bit of a chat.
Yeah, and the bowl, I have to tell you, those listening, it is the most rich, vibrant collection of berries and reds. And what are the berries in here from your garden?
There are strawberries, raspberries, some loganberries, and then a whole load of currants. So red currants, white currants and black currants. And we talked quite a lot about currants yesterday, didn't we? And then I've just chopped up an apple into it as well. So obviously apple isn't from our garden because our garden's too new to have apples yet.
But I was raiding your strawberry patches and your raspberry hedges and learning about currants, because that's something that I haven't grown in my garden. And
currants grown on a bush are quite tangy, quite sharp, quite acid. They definitely need something to sweeten them. If you're eating them en masse, I mean, I will pick them off. I'll pick them off the shrub and just the bushes and just eat them as they are. But you don't want a whole bowl of them like that, because they hit the acid, sour, sharp, whatever bit that is on your tongue, and makes it zing quite a lot.
We have quite a few berries of different sorts in our garden, because I can't really grow those, but I grow things like acerola cherries and Brazilian cherries and all sort of subtropical berries that are just all around. And on my pathway, so I left my car at the top of my block. I have a very long 1 acre that sort of faces down the west. It was the last block in the eco village. I didn't want a western facing block, but there you go, I got it. So all the way down this block, I've left the cars at the top, and as you meander your way down to the house, there's this berry path. So there's jaboticabas and acerolas and Brazilian cherries and all these things that I put them there because it's the most used path in my house. And I need to check when they're coming on so I can get them before the birds do and have a little bit of a harvest on the way down. It's kind of nice. There's a few berries and then the chickens are on the side, then the garden. And as I go down, before I've even reached the house, I've got the meal ready to go. It's very nice. Brilliant. But they're the sorts of berries I've got. And they also, why I mentioned it was because they're also very tart and tangy, and they're not, unless they're super ripe, they're not great to eat raw. So I also make lots of stewed fruits or sauces, and yeah, it's wonderful.
It's interesting because you were saying you didn't want a west-facing garden, which for us would be the equivalent of an east-facing garden.
Ah, yeah.
In the northern hemisphere.
Well, see, in Australia, it's facing towards the hot afternoon sun, and the hot afternoon sun in Australian summers sucks the life out of things. So the first thing I had to do, you talked about, putting lots of windbreaks in to stop the wind.
Yeah.
Mine was lots of sun breaks. So all the way through is just these small little windbreaks. They're windbreaks as well as sun breaks, but mostly sun.
So things to create a bit of shade as you're
just
going
to tuck things in behind.
But do you want to talk a little bit about the refugee stuff?
Yeah, it's a big part of what I do, actually. I find every day I'm in conversation with young, mostly women, in refugee settlements across East Africa. So Kenya, Tanzania, and mostly Uganda. And I connected with them through the perma-youth movement, which my daughter helped to get going. And basically, because my course is online, I've invited anyone from those refugee settlements who has the capacity and the interest to join the Permaculture Educators Program to come on and be part of that. And as they're going through and becoming permaculture teachers, they're saying this is so important to share with our community. And so they're localising and adapting it and putting into their language with the kind of resources they have available and setting up learning, living hubs, demonstration gardens, nutrition hubs in the camps. And so what we do is have conversations between, say, Rolanda or Brenda, who's over in Uganda, with our global learning community, and they say, oh, this is what we're doing. And basically people from our community donate into our charity, and then 100% of that I send across to the community, to Roland and the others in the refugee settlements, and the way it kind of feeds
fantastic.
back. Yeah, and so they just then tell the story the next time they're there about what's happening, or send photos into our system, and I share those out through Instagram. So we have a series of Instagram accounts too. So this is the Permaculture Education Institute and the Ethos Foundation and the Perma Youth, and all of those news just goes out through that. And what it means is that over the last year or so, 1,500 young people have been through permaculture courses. There's a series of hubs all up and down the refugee settlements.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and just setting up demonstrations, going around to house, helping them set up kitchen gardens. Because what I discovered in the camps was that some of them, the newer people who arrive, get $3 a month to buy food. They don't give out food aid anymore. The World Food Programme is running out of food to give out, and it's become quite corrupt, the whole process of getting food aid to people. So people get really rubbish food by the time they get there, and no money really to buy it. So growing food is absolutely essential. And
is $3 a month sufficient to buy the very basics?
they can get some maize meal and some beans. No fresh vegetables. So that's why the permaculture programs are absolutely essential, because they're actually growing the nutrient, the vitamins and that they need to keep them healthy and strong. And you're in a refugee camp, you're suffering from trauma of being displaced. You really need to keep that going. And so these permaculture hubs that are there are also places that are where people can come and just breathe out as well. They can relax. Yeah. They're in community. They're doing something positive together. They're cooking together. They're talking and sharing together, and also building relationships across the cultures, because there's so many different people from so many different tribes and countries living there, and it can be quite fractious. Whereas in the garden, that kind of starts to fall away.
That falls away, and then there's not only the garden thing. There then is the communal food. Just as you and I are doing, chatting over food. Yeah. There is something really bonding about sharing a meal. Yeah. Or sharing, food with people.
And the other thing that's really important about these gardens is that most of Africa cooks on wood.
Yeah.
And a lot of wood.
Yeah.
And so all around the camps is getting massively deforested. So looking at, actually, what are they cooking food on? And then growing some bits that you can coppice so that you can use, really efficient wood cookers, using the timber that you grow in your gardens as well, or looking at simple things like solar cookers, or even cook bags. So basically,
like the sun oven type things. Yeah.
Well, but also have you seen the ones that are cloth, and you just shove your pot, you get it to boiling, and then shove it into an insulated bag, and then it keeps cooking like a slow cooker.
Oh, fantastic!
So there's no fuel required. So we've helped to support a group of young women to start making those, and so one, it's a livelihood for them. Two, they give it to new arrivals who've just landed, so we sponsor that bit, and then they're not having to go out and chop the wood and it's normally the women's work to go and chop the wood and gather the water and all of that sort of thing. And as soon as they start to go off the camp and out into the wild spaces, they're also in danger.
Yeah.
And that's really important to help to keep the young women safe. And so there's so much entwined in this, and just being in conversation every day with these young women and finding ways to connect them with the global learning community. And what's also happened is, because they've built relationships, someone will say, well, I'm a teacher at a nutrition college, and so one of them's got a degree in nutrition now. Someone else is doing a degree in business, and someone else is doing another degree, and so they're all actually being able to finish their education and go further. And
fantastic.
One of the things, just as a final thing, they've said it's given them hope where they never had hope before. They just felt like they were stuck in this middle place, couldn't go back, had no idea where they're going to. All of a sudden, they have this connection with a global community, and they felt like, there's possibility of me having a future, me having a life. And that's amazing.
Hope is so important. It's a really good thing to do, Morag.
Yeah, thank you.
Here in Wet Wales, you've discovered how very wet and windy it is, and seen what I'm doing to mitigate those. But it's really, I think it's quite hard for us to imagine and understand how hot or cold it is and how wet or dry.
Yeah, well, I describe where we are in 3 summers, actually. So at the moment, we're in the dry summer. It's where there's no rainfall, much happening, and you can still plant things, but it's really hot and dry. And then we go into the sort of the subtropical summer, which is the wet summer. And then we go into the cool summer in our winter. So in summertime we get 30, 35 degrees and humid as anything. It's kind of quite oppressive. But in wintertime it's beautiful. It's like 20, 25 degrees and just bright blue skies, light.
It's one of the things that I really noticed when I visited Australia, 15, nearly 20 years ago, was just the quality of the light is so much clearer and so much more intense.
It is. I grew up in Melbourne, right down in the southern parts of Australia, and it's a little bit more like England, I think. My mum's from England, and that's where they landed when she was about 4 or 5, and it was similar-ish. I've moved up for love, for many different reasons, up further north. And the first thing I did when I landed in the subtropics, I had to go and buy a pair of sunglasses. I just literally, my eyes felt like it was too much. It was so much light. So I really love it. It's absolutely beautiful. And there's so few people really who live up in that area that the air is really clean, the water's clean. Like the river just next to me, I can swim in it, I can drink from it.
Nice.
It's really nice, and so much wildlife around us as well. So I'm about 2 hours out of the city, which means I can go there if I need to for a show or something with the kids, but I can retreat to this beautiful space. And at night time, the stars go from horizon to horizon because it's just fantastic. So crisp and clear. Yeah.
That's one of the things that we've talked about over this weekend is having space to retreat to, and how it's great to go out and meet people, and it really is great to go out and meet people and to do stuff, but to have that sanctuary to return to that is your private space, in respect to each of our private spaces, and how important those are, and how increasingly they're becoming more and more important to us.
I can't even imagine I can't begin to describe how important that is, because it's where I fill my cup again. You go out into the garden, and you were saying yesterday that you just go out to the garden sometimes and just go and wander and look, and it's not going out to go do as much as we need to do that at different times. But I just spend a lot of time out, plucking the little flowers, seeing what's going on, talking to the kangaroos in the garden, chatting with kids about what's happening at the moment. And I just find that if I can have that space to retreat into my little world with all the other species that are there, I just feel nourished enough to be able to step back out again. And it's that quiet topping up. I grew up in the suburbs in Melbourne, but Mum and Dad created this house where they designed it so it looked out towards the north, which for us is the sunny side, which meant that was very odd because the front of the street-facing part was the back, was the laundry.
Yeah.
And so it didn't represent the street, it represented the landscape. And the path to get down was this windy little path down the side of the house, and Mum had planted these mint bushes. It's Prostanthera, different varieties, and so it was a native mint. And as you went down, you brushed the mint.
Lovely.
I was and then they had these beautiful purple flowers that are just coming out now. And I'd been at university studying in the centre of town. And I'd come home after a day of just head full and pollution, and as soon as I hit that path and I just brushed that and the scent released, I was in this sanctuary of this piece. And so I guess I've tried to recreate that sense wherever I go, because that opportunity just to breathe out, because you're so busy all the time interacting, and then just to be able to go, this is just home. And I really think that sense of home is something so beautiful, and it's hard to describe in the English language, I think. When you say home, often people think, it's the house. No, it's
a feeling, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I think Norway has a word for it.
Oh, do they? Do you know what it is?
It's something like hug, but it's maybe I'm going to spell, and I'm probably
that
spelling
hygge?
it.
Hygge?
Yes, HYGGE or
Right.
something, and I think that means that kind of that cosy warmth, security, love feeling that you have at home.
Yeah.
That you don't necessarily get elsewhere.
Yeah. And for me, that extends from the house to the garden to being in relationship with, the migratory birds that come in, and the ones that come every day and land on our door and poke their head in the house and say, good morning.
Yeah.
The king parrots are just extraordinary. They are so beautiful. Large parrots with a breast as bright as this bowl of berries, and they just poke their heads around the corner and have a chat, and my 10-year-old son just gets drawn out and just sits and chats with them. They land on his head, and
Oh, wow.
that's so nice.
Wow.
Yeah, so I love it, absolutely love it. Yeah.
Amazing. When we were walking around the garden yesterday, one of the things that we were... Not that I was trying to focus on it or something or anything. Well, I was. But one of the things we were looking at was the different smells of things as we went around. And so I'd also talk to you about this year I'm focusing on the sounds in the garden, the sounds that the wind makes as it goes through leaves, or leaves fall to the ground, or the crunchiness underneath. And we spent quite a lot of time padding our feet up and down where it was so wet and muddy. I'm almost making muddy puddles in the... So I am concentrating on sound, but the thing of aromas and scent and smell in the garden is so important to me. So important to have in almost every bed something that smells, so that as I'm brushing past it I get the smells being released.
Yeah. And there's something deeply evocative, but it's somewhere deep inside it switches on certain intelligences. I did a garden in Hong Kong. It was on the 4th floor balcony, and it was at a home for people with dementia. Mm-hmm. And this garden outside, they chose these plants because they were their favourite plants. And it was something about the smell of them, that they would just hold them and crush them. And what the nurses were saying was they became more lucid when they had the contact with the plants, because there was some of the smell or the taste as well. But mostly it was the smell that took them to places where they remembered, where they hadn't remembered things for a long time. Yeah. And I just thought that was incredibly powerful. And I'm glad that you mentioned about the sounds, because when I went back out to do some filming, of different parts of it, all I could notice mostly was what was making different sounds. The corn was rustling, and there was like a beautiful seed pod that was rustling. Yeah. And I just was in your soundscape. It really alerted me to that. Thank you.
You're welcome. So I'm going to ask some really basic questions if you don't mind. When did you start gardening? What brought you into gardening? And then can you tell me a little bit about your journey into permaculture?
I grew up in Melbourne, as I said, and my mum loved her garden, but she didn't do vegetable gardening so much. She loved planting native trees for creating habitat for wildlife. And so she would walk around with me and she'd be telling me all the Latin names. I think she thought she was really quite clever that she'd learnt them, and so she really wanted to share them. And the fact that it was little me, 2 or 3-year-old, walking around with her learning all the Latin names of Acacia fimbriata and she'd tell me why she'd planted them, and particularly for all the different birds. And one of my first memories is of seeing a kookaburra that had come and landed in this garden that my mum had planted. And I was so excited because I think one of the storybooks that she used to read to me was not actually a storybook but a bird book. And I recognised this bird from the book, so I beetled off inside.
So kookaburras do that almost sounds like a laugh almost, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's the laughing kookaburra. And so I saw this kookaburra from the balcony, and I raced inside and I got the book, and I was busy out showing, here you are. and so this love of being in the garden, the love of being connected to the garden in a way that thinking it wasn't just for us, it wasn't just a functional thing, it was actually we're part of this habitat. And I think that, just from that early age, really switched me on. I don't actually remember precisely the moment. There wasn't one moment where I switched on to edible gardens. But I think one of the most powerful ones was when I went and stayed with a village in Ladakh up in the Himalayas, and where everything came from the earth and went back to the earth. And I was out in the gardens, I was helping them in the fields and helping, milk the yaks. And there was something about that. I'd been to university and I knew how to design landscape. I did landscape architecture. And then I realised, I never had any connection with food. And here I am going from seed to field to the water-powered grinder to the vegetables, and just sitting in the field eating this and being part of that. I thought, I have no idea how to nourish myself, how to grow food for myself. And so the first thing I did when I got back home was enroll in a permaculture course and just learn how to reconnect the food system with the design system, because I had the design part, but I really wanted to understand more about that. And then as soon as I finished that course, well, actually it was at that course that I met Evan, my husband.
Yeah.
And then I moved up to Brisbane, and in the local paper I saw this little note that said, is anyone interested in starting a city farm? Come along to this public meeting. And so that was within the week that I arrived in Brisbane. I joined that and just played in a city farm, trying to create and learn how to garden side by siding with other people. And that was that.
Fantastic.
So that was about 30 odd years ago.
So have you got there yet? Do you know how to feed yourself?
Well,
I know the answer to this, really.
Yeah. I know how to feed myself in a community rather than all by myself. And I think that's a really important thing. And also know my limitations. Like, for example, I'm not going to try and force things to grow in my area that I can't grow.
Yeah.
Like, I can't grow wheat, for example. It just doesn't grow in the subtropical area. So I make relationships with farmers around, or I just choose to eat different stuff.
Yes.
Like, I don't have to eat wheat. I can eat, potatoes from the garden, or yacon, or, things like your beautiful beans. We have Madagascar beans in our place that can fill the role of the starches and the carbohydrates and the proteins, and just really look differently. But I'm not 100% self-sufficient, and I'm not aiming for that in my garden. I'm aiming to find a set of relationships with my local area. And what I can't get, I still go to the shops.
And we talk about being self-efficient. So, we're growing what we can in our environment and using it in the best ways that we can. But we're never going to grow sufficient tea for me to drink. We're never going to grow coffee. Not that we could, we probably could if we got all the gear and the heaters and a right number of glass houses and things to grow all these things. Yeah. But there's an awful lot of food that actually we just like I like pineapple maybe twice a year.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to go to the expense of setting up some sort of heating system with a greenhouse so that it's warm enough to grow those 2 pineapples.
It's totally inefficient. You're right, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's so we want to be as efficient as we can, not in a clinical way, but just say this is what we can grow, this is what we can eat, and accept that there are things we're always going to buy, like those wheat products, like the grain products, really. And then and do exactly as you do, and we change what we eat according to what's in season and what's available. And we know this year, for example, which has been a dreadful growing year here because it's just rained so much, we're going to buy in an awful lot more this winter than we would other years, but we're not going to beat ourselves up about it. It's just, that's the way it is,
reality.
And we hope next year will be better.
Yeah. And I think too, it's just when you are in your own garden, you can eat more of the different parts. I've just noticed in my garden, for example, there's things that would normally you don't get in the shops, because say for example you're growing broccoli, well you just see the broccoli, whereas all the broccoli is edible. And also if you're growing mustard greens, for example, they come up in my garden. I can't stop them coming up, they're just everywhere. But from the moment they sprout to the moment that they're seeded, I can use all the different parts of the plant. And so it's really shifting the perception about I'm growing this, harvest at this time, and that's it, and I'll weigh it and measure it, and I've done. Like, I don't know how much produce. I'm constantly harvesting every day, a couple of leaves of this and a snip of that, the broccoli, snap the top off, then more comes. It just keeps coming. I can't actually eat as much as what's grown in there in terms of the volume of greens in particular. There's a lot there for other species, a lot to hand out. Maybe there's a name for it, but a bouquet that has edible flowers and edible greens and all herbs. And so when I go somewhere, I'll take that and pop it in there. And one of my friends, she said, I was having lemon myrtle tea off that bouquet for ages.
That's really nice.
There must be a name for it. Do you know a name?
No, let's make a name.
Let's make
a name.
We'll
think of a name.
We'll think of a name, yeah.
Food. So, Morag, I know that we need to get going and get doing stuff today. So it's been really lovely to chat. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you for having me. You are just like the kindest, nicest host and the nicest person I've met. Thank you, Liz. You looked after me so well.
Well, I hope that when people come here, they feel loved.
Absolutely.
Unwanted
I feel
and
totally
chilled
loved.
and all of those things. So.
I was like, when we noticed when I first got here, I'd come down the motorway and I arrived, sorry Liz, I'm really late. And then within a couple of hours, it was like, oh. Well, not even a couple of hours. I think almost as soon as I walked in, he was just like, right, I've landed in a calm, peaceful place. So thank you.
Brilliant. So how do people find you online? How do they get in touch? How do they find your courses?
Well, my main place where I've put everything now is Permaculture Education Institute. So that's it's a very long URL. It's permacultureeducationinstitute.org.
Right.
And in the menu there's my podcast, there's the Perma Youth program, there's the program that we support refugees, and all of our courses as well.
Brilliant. So I'll leave those in the show notes.
The podcast you've been listening to is a Byther Farm production. All rights reserved.